So our next speaker, we met him at the Vancouver Mini Makers Fair, another event produced by volunteers like us. And when he started to talk about his transition going from childhood to manhood and how it transforms his art, it was just very passionate about it, and we just couldn't stop listening to him. So we decided to bring him in here today. So Christina and Beverly are just going to show us one of his pieces of art that you might have seen at the lunchtime already.
27 feet long.
Here you go. It keeps going. Yeah. And now, please welcome Sean.
Sean Karemaker.
Hey there.
He's going to walk and carry it outside.
So, as you can tell, I'm kind of OCD with my art. Like I'm pretty obsessed, and this is something that has been kind of a lifelong thing for me. And I don't know if I ever chose it. I think I was sort of an introverted kid, and I just started doing it. But along the way, I worked on video games and comic books and graphic design and basically anything I could find related to art. So it's been an interesting career. But from the very start, my first interest was in comic books, and it started out with collecting comic books. I used to love superheroes like Batman and Superman and the Green Lantern and Moon Knight and probably other heroes you haven't heard about. But I used to go around collecting comic books from local like garage sales or from the thrift store or from antique shops or bookstores, wherever I could find them. And I lived in a small town, so there wasn't a lot of those to find, but I looked in every corner I could. And of course, my goal was to become a comic artist from that point. So what I did is I turned my little closet into a studio, and I started just drawing them. While my brothers were outside playing, I just sat in there with my light table and all my little pictures that I cut out of my comics on the wall, and I just drew, and I drew all the time. And maybe I was a little bit of a geek, but it was just something that I loved. And, I shared my comics with my brothers. We lived out in the woods, so there wasn't really anybody to show them to. But I created a whole world for myself, and it was something that was rich and elaborate. And as time went on, I got into more things. I started building clay sculptures, and I started doing posters, and I started doing paintings. Basically, whatever supplies I could get, I got into them. My parents knew I was serious about it, so they got me those supplies. And I remember when I was a little kid, one of my favorite toys was my watercolor set. And that's when I really started, getting into the colors. But, as time went on, I got a little bit older. I started going to high school. That's when I started seeing art as an avenue for meeting new people. In high school, art went from something that was kind of geeky into something that, made me stand out and be unique. So I shared my art with as many people as I could, and I think that's something I would encourage you to do as well. The more you share it, the more encouragement you're going to get from other people. But it was a weird thing that I did, it was kind of unusual in a small town. I started doing posters for bands, and I started doing underground zines and different things like that. It just elaborated more on the things I was doing when I was younger. But as I started getting a little bit older, I had to start thinking about what to do in college. And that was a bit of a challenge because, what does somebody like me do in college, somebody who's so obsessed with art? So I went to my career planning course, and they said, well, graphic design is pretty close. And I was like, okay, what is that, And they're like, well, you make logos, and you work for companies doing advertising and stuff like that. So I said, okay, well, I guess that sounds all right. So I decided to take a shot at that. And so I went to college, and it was a great experience because I got to meet new people, but it was a little different than what I had been doing before. But I sunk my energy into it, and after 2 years, I got into starting to work in that field. I worked for a company called Bad Dog Graphics. We made we made signs for local businesses and advertising art and stuff like that. So it was interesting. But one thing I found was the people there didn't share the same passion or enthusiasm for art as I did. I was always a perfectionist, and I was always really obsessed with making something that I was proud of. But here we were kind of rushing through work, and we were kind of doing stuff that I felt was maybe not substandard, maybe being a little bit headstrong as a kid. I got in some clashes with them, and it was the first job I'd been fired from, you know? I was devastated because I always tried so hard, but in this case, the values that I had didn't line up with their values, and they kicked me to the curb. So, but it was a good experience. It was humbling, and I collected myself. I started working at a convenience store and continued drawing, and I really didn't know what to do next. I did that for a few years and tried saving up my money to think about what I could do in school. And around this time, the industry for video games in Vancouver started blooming. And one of my friends got a job in that, and he encouraged me, based on my sort of fantastical drawings, to get into working on video games. So I came out from Vancouver Island, like the Beverly Hillbillies, with all my stuff, and I decided to try getting into that industry. So I went, around to each business and showed them what I had, not knowing exactly how you do it. And eventually one of the art directors there helped me get my first job, but it was only a 2-week contract working on Sonic the Hedgehog game for PSP, which I was thrilled about because, everybody knows who that is. And after a few game projects, I started getting more confidence, and I moved up from being a junior artist to a senior artist, and eventually a lead artist. And I was going from company to company and sort of learning more and more. So, I was becoming a lot more confident, and by society's standards, I was gaining more success. But there was a point in time where I was working as a lead artist at a company called Ubisoft, and I was sort of evaluating myself compared to what my original goals were in an office while I was working in Excel on spreadsheet documents for time management, which is really has nothing to do with art, but it's kind of what you can end up doing if you get into that management side, which I was in. And so around this time, I said, what the heck, why don't I start drawing comics again, And I started drawing a comic that was about my observations in Vancouver, about my own feelings and about my own experiences. And it was really something that I just did for myself. But because people identified with it and they talked to me about it, it gave me sort of more encouragement to continue doing that. I started drawing more for myself. And it didn't take long before this art gallery offered me an art show, and I never even went to too many art shows. It was something that I wasn't really pursuing, but because I was doing something that meant something to me, it also meant something to other people. And I was doing this while I was continuing to work, so it was becoming stressful balancing the two things. And as my own fine art started lifting off in some ways, started getting more art shows, the company I was working for shut down, and and so I was like, okay, well, I guess this gives me a bit of an opportunity. And at the same time, I was offered a position teaching at an orphanage in Mexico, where I took all of my supplies over to Mexico, and I started working on that big scroll that you saw earlier. That was, a real life-changing experience, and I was over there for a few months, so it really gave me time to think, and it changed my value system a little bit. And I couldn't help but wonder what all those things looked like from when I was a kid. I'd packed them up so long ago when I decided to become a graphic designer. They were still in a box in my parents' closet, and when I came back, I peeled the tape away from that box, and inside I found the contents were, all these old drawings and sculptures and ideas that I had that I'd come up with purely on my own as a kid. And it was remarkable how similar they were to the ideas that I had as an adult. And I was shocked that, somehow, when I was a young kid without all these influences of society, I'd sort of had it nailed as far as what I wanted to do. And if I only had started that when I was younger, I could have been miles ahead. So basically, what I'm telling you is that even though you're young, your ideas might be really strong. You might have ideas that later on in life you'll say, hey, what about if I just continue with that? So don't necessarily get too realistic with your goals. Just do what you want to do, and think about money or success second. Just do the things that really matter to you. It seems to have worked out okay for me, so There you go.